You only need to know me. I will be the one.
So this video is being released after chapter 1019, but it was finished several days ago. As of Monday, I wanted to continue talking about the sun god in a way that others perhaps have yet to talk about. An idea that I stumbled upon that seems too likely to be pure coincidence. But the main takeaway from this video will be the other persons potentially referenced by the sun god Nika, as well as what this means for Luffy's fight with Kaido, something that I mentioned in another recent video about Luffy's final gear. What does it mean for a man to draw his blade and extend his hand? Is he not, in the process, extending a vision of himself? And so a true swordsman in that singular act becomes the blade itself. I want to focus this idea on Shanks and his sword Griffin, a sword believed to rival the supreme grade swords, as in believed to be of the same rank. The sword is named after a bird of the ancient Greek and Indian mythos, the griffin. In any mythology, the griffin is portrayed as a mix between an eagle and a lion. I just want to briefly throw in there that griffins are legendary beasts that have yet to be seen in the actual One Piece story, but apparently they do exist. Big Mom had revealed that she and Montior had trapped one from the South Blue inside a book filled with creatures during Whole Cake Island. But the most common portrayal of the griffin in mythology is as a creature part lion, part eagle that is regal, kingly, one who commanded deep respect, often seen as a symbol of courage. Taking a moment to compare this to Shanks, then, there's been some toys going around, I think in Japan and elsewhere, that compare Shanks to a lion, and he is a disciple, you could say, of the Pirate King. Perhaps one the world government thought for a time would be the next king, someone to watch. Shanks has been shown to instill fear, but also command deep respect among pirates, submarines such as Sengoku, as well as the world government and its Gorosei, which I was going to discuss in this video, but we'll save that for another time. The lion was considered to be the king of the beasts, while an eagle was the king of the birds. The griffin, as a hybrid of these two, inherited the qualities of both, making it very powerful and the so-called legendary king or ruler of all creatures. It is interesting that dragons and griffins share something in common despite being fantastical creatures, and so we should examine Shanks and Kaido similarly, despite them both being Yonko. Both are known for similar, albeit slightly different things depending on the culture behind the myth. But from Greek legend, the dragon also subscribes to the notion of protecting some sort of gold or treasure. The griffin is said by Greeks to also fiercely guard its own treasure. And as we just mentioned, the former pirate king, the griffin is the offspring of the king of the beasts. And so Shanks, while not Roger's son, while not his offspring, was a cabin boy on Roger's ship and so a product of his teachings. Maybe. Kaido and Shanks seem to have this contrast, you could say, this relationship to kingship. One a cabin boy to Zebedee Rocks, or an apprentice I guess, the other to Goldie Roger, both enemies in the past. And it would seem, Kaido and Shanks have inherited a part of their deceased captain's wills. Other legends depict the griffin as a trickster, much like the Sphinx, who would challenge people with riddles in a contest of wits. The winners would get to keep their lives and treasures, and the losers wouldn't. This might support the idea though that some of Luffy and Shanks reuniting and maybe having a Davy back fight, although whether Luffy does meet Shanks again remains to be seen. As they represented both wisdom and power, griffins were commonly associated with strength in war, thus being an obvious choice for many coats of arms from ancient to medieval families and armies. The Republic of Genoa used the griffin as a symbol of its seafaring power on all of its ships in the Middle Ages. A lot of videos have been made by various YouTubers about Shanks and keeping the balance of power already, so I won't go into that too much. But the conclusion is Shanks has some relationship again to not just the Norse but Greek mythology. But in terms of Norse mythology, he fits the description of the Norse god Tyr, who championed war and bloodshed but also order and justice. So with Griffin, we get a Greek extension of the Norse characterization, a heavy emphasis on Shanks' courage and capacity in battle. This notion of courage is interesting, and if you're still with me, because this is where things get interesting, Shanks' sword, as an extension of his own character, will or spirit you could say, is drawn to the courageous spirits of others, I think, if only symbolically. Think back to two key moments in One Piece as we also consider how in Harry Potter, there was another legendary bird of courage, the Phoenix. Mythology says the Phoenix song instills courage in pure-hearted persons. those who are on the side of good, and strikes fear into evil. Harry belonged to a house coincidentally known as House Gryffindor, relating to the Griffin. The people belonging to this house were known for their bravery and determination, and there's a moment when the Phoenix is summoned to his side because of his fierce loyalty to what we call a mentor of sorts, Dumbledore, someone who sets and plans a series of motions that I won't spoil any further for those of you that might be reading this book or watching the movies for the first time right now. But those key moments I mentioned from One Piece involving Shanks, wielder of the sword Griffin. Chapter 1, Luffy decides to take on the mountain bandits himself since Shanks wouldn't fight them. In that way, he was defending the honor of the man and crew he most admired. And what happens? Shanks suddenly appears, quietly, without a sound, before letting his presence be known. I've watched this scene several times, and it still intrigues me, how nonchalantly he just pulls up to the commotion, having wondered why no one had come to see him and the crew off. After drowning at sea, Luffy is then rescued by Shanks, who once again appears out of nowhere. We still don't know how, but his words are what are key. Shanks brings up Luffy's courage, as depicted in the prior panels, Luffy defending the namesake of the red-haired pirates and the crew's captain, saying Shanks is no coward. And as he stood up for his captain, it can be said Luffy's own courage shone from that point in the bar to the very moment Shanks rushed in to save him from drowning. Again, as Luffy cried out for help, similar to the legendary bird that appeared before Harry Potter as he coincidentally battled a serpent, a basilisk. Luffy's loyalty summoned Shanks in a sense to his side before his own serpent, a Sea King. Shanks says he was told by Makino how it all happened. Luffy had stood up for him, defended him. And for me, I think Shanks would have saved Luffy regardless, but as we see, Shanks later gave Luffy a straw hat, reminded of his Captain Roger by the words as well as character of this funny rubber kid. I can't help but think Luffy's actions are what really impressed upon Shanks the need to protect him, to keep him alive. Although I'm sure Shanks' own personality and sense of justice and fairness fall into this as mentioned earlier. But next we have Marineford, and this fits into a lot of different ideas, but first, Shanks once again appears out of nowhere. He appears just as Akainu is about to demolish this kid named Kobe for speaking out against the atrocities being inflicted upon the battlefield, the bloodshed and violence, the senseless loss of life, as Kobe recognizes the impending death that is crashing down towards him in the form of scorching hot magma, and has absolutely no regrets. Shanks stops Akainu's fist with his sword Griffin, drawn to Kobe's brave defiance in that moment. Shanks then says, "Well done, young man. For better or worse, those few seconds of courage will profoundly influence the very fate of this world." Shanks' mention of courage fits the title of the chapter, a few seconds of courage, but once again, Shanks is summoned to a specific location, saving a marine who to him was otherwise nameless, of no importance or consequence whatsoever, but clearly this moment itself has great consequence, for Shanks says so himself. Returning to Greek mythology, it is said that a griffin pulled the chariot of Apollo, the Greek god of the sun, otherwise known as the sun god. The griffin was thought to be stronger than an ox or a horse, and had the ability to fly, thus carrying the sun god to and from the sun and earth, to and from various locations at light speed. Apollo often represented wisdom in the form of knowledge, which is also a characteristic of the griffin. Thus, the griffin and the sun god share similar traits. But griffins also pulled the chariot of the Greek and Roman goddess Nemesis, known for balance, retribution, and vengeance, and griffins were also considered to be the hounds of Zeus. By their association with Apollo, griffins became associated with the sun, and through their service to the goddess Nemesis became known as protectors and guardians, carrying out retribution for injustice on offenders. Now, I had mentioned India earlier, and it was only to point out one thing of interest from the Indian mythos of the griffin that supports what I've been saying about Shanks' sword and other things that I've been alluding to so far. Even in the Indian mythos of the griffin and some parts of the Middle East, the griffin was held to be sacred to the sun, and curiously, griffins were considered formidable enough to defeat even dragons, which, if you recall, Shanks was said to have fought or at the very least stopped Kaido somehow from reaching Marineford. But the sun god, and the griffin being a creature that carried or led the chariot of Apollo, setting aside the other gods for now as well as the griffin being a protector. Well, for one, the griffin is also said to serve as a marker at times for tombstones, a symbol of protection, Shanks, wherever he buried Ace and Whitebeard, seems to maybe have that area under his protection, similar to a griffin, maybe explaining why it hasn't been ransacked by pirates like Moria. Sabo even found their graves somehow and paid his respects, and I've been meaning to speak on Shanks and Dragon, Shanks and the Revolutionaries in the future, but Shanks also has been theorized to be a protector of Luffy, a guardian of Laughtail and Gold D. Rogers' will. A will that he has passed on to Luffy, and so protecting Luffy and Rogers' will kind of go hand in hand. Now, a few things to consider in terms of the Sun God then. The Sun God Nika, who may or may not be Joy Boy, and perhaps various people were worthy of this inheritance of will, but simply did not live up to the moment. But Griffin carries the chariot of Apollo, the god of the sun. If Shanks' sword is Griffin, would that not make him the Sun God? In that sense, he would be Apollo. A lot of people believe Shanks to have dominion over Elbaf. I'm not too sure. Maybe he's allied with them or he has friends there, I don't know. I don't believe such a prideful people would allow themselves to be conquered, would they? But then again, we do have Wano and they were prideful as well and Kaido conquered them. But Kaido's a villain and we don't really think that Shanks is necessarily a villain. But there's a god of the sun that the people of Elbaf worship and give thanks to, similar to Skypiea and I'm sure elsewhere. Is Shanks the god or a god of Elbaf? I don't know. But his ship is connected to Vikings, Elbaf as well, and Shanks' ship is emblazoned with the image of a sun below that of a dragon. If we do connect the sun god Nika and Joy Boy together as many have chosen to do, Luffy seems to be the child of prophecy, the one being spoken of. Nika is described as a freer of slaves, and I would guess other prisoners and Luffy definitely fits that description. Aside from his ship, the Thousand Sunny, the straw hat Luffy wears has many connections to the sun. I saw a tweet from someone named Jazeer on Twitter bringing up an old idea about the design of the straw hat and the question that was asked about why does a red-like line appear when the sun is on the horizon? Well, the answer is, at dawn or sunset, the light rays coming from the sun travels through a thicker and longer atmosphere, the horizon to the beholder's eyes, which in turn cuts out the shorter wavelengths of light, such as blue or green, etc., while the one that is able to pass through the most is the red wavelength. Hence a red ribbon-like phenomena appears. And so, this is what maybe inspired Luffy's hat. There is also the idea that the dawn will rise when the red line of Mary Joie will be destroyed. But I also think, aside from the symbolism and stuff we've talked about in other videos about ushering in a new dawn into the world, Luffy's red hawk attacks. Why the color or name red to describe what has otherwise been your typical yellow-orange fire? Well, maybe because of something the animators chose to do in a recent episode as the Straw Hat Pirates begin their raid of Onigashima. You can clearly see Luffy using Red Hawk, and it is drawn in the form of a flaming sun. You have to wonder if Red Hawk then, given its appearance as the sun here, will eventually resemble the dawn and turn red. We'll see how the animators go about animating the Red Rock upgrade that was used against Kaido in Chapter 1000 though, but it's an interesting possibility, but not the main point of where we're going. If Luffy is Joy Boy or the Sun God Nika, then Shanks via Griffin is the figure of legend pulling Luffy's chariot, guiding him toward some sort of end. Shanks is the one that set the path of the Sun God Luffy in motion, but we have to consider an equally important possibility, that Shanks is or was himself the Sun God in the past, since his sword Griffin is based upon a mythical creature that belonged to the likes of the Sun God Apollo. Shanks who wore the straw hat long before Luffy did as well. As we begin to assess the concept of the Sun God in Griffin mythology and apply it to Luffy's new power, potentially we have to remember that a lot of people believe Shanks to be a product of Viking culture and Norse mythology. But it is increasingly likely, because the Griffin predominantly stems from Greek mythology, that Shanks is a byproduct of many mythologies, legends and historical events similar to other characters in One Piece. And the same is true of Luffy if you watch my The Truth About Luffy video and the video about Luffy and Usopp and the Sun God. In this case, or for this video, I want to say that the main focus should be upon his Norse and Greek connections when questioning his relationship to Luffy. As a guide or protector of Luffy, Laughtail, the One Piece, or whatever, Norse mythology speaks of Ragnarok, the end of the world, a great war, and maybe this is what Shanks is waiting for, watching over Luffy until he is ready, until he becomes the great pirate he said he would be. I want to look back at Marineford, Shanks summoned to the courage of Kobe, and Shanks' words about for better or worse, those few seconds of courage profoundly influencing the fate of this world. Why? What exactly did Kobe's courage allow to happen? Well, for one, Shanks got into it with Kaido. If not for that encounter, Kaido would have arrived to Marineford. Shanks at the very least might have arrived much faster than he did, but they both stalled each other from some particular aim. In Shanks' case, he says he came to end this war, but I can't help but think it wasn't just because of the bloodshed or Whitebeard waging war. I think there are two people actually to look at closely when considering Shanks' actions, two characters of direct and indirect relation to Shanks' captain, Goldie Roger, Luffy and Ace. As for Luffy, Shanks had his back since chapter 1, Luffy getting beat up. Shanks shows up and saves him. Luffy is then kidnapped. Shanks freaks out. Shanks then saves Luffy again from the Sea King. Later on, a decade or so later, Shanks tells people about Luffy such as Rayleigh, and Rayleigh recognizes Luffy and serves as a guide, you could say, and also argue, a protector to an extent for him, in place of Shanks, whose promise to Luffy can't be broken by his own personal intervention. Then we have Marineford, the one exception. Notice how Shanks is not surprised at all that Luffy is there to save his brother Ace, not in the slightest. Instead, there is a severity to his mood, a seriousness to his expression, but also a sense of relief that Luffy is alright, as they cannot meet yet, nor can Luffy's journey end like this, that just maybe they still have to keep their promise to one another. And so Shanks returns the Straw Hat to Luffy through Buggy. Shanks, in the process of ending the war, kind of saved Luffy's life again, don't you think? Not just Kobe's life, as I just mentioned, but also Luffy's, otherwise the Marines would have surely caught Law's submarine, without the distraction of another Emperor of the Sea arriving. It would seem the griffin that guides the chariot of the god Apollo is also headed toward the sun. But Ace. There's a belief, as others have mentioned, that Ace was supposed to be Joy Boy, maybe, and so the sun god Nika. And Shanks had been in Fuchsia Village looking or searching for Roger's child who, if you recall, had been hidden from not just the world government but from everyone. So no wonder if this is true, Shanks couldn't find him, even after all that time. It just so happened that when looking for someone's child, you might think they'd act like their parent, or in this case father. And so here you have Luffy, who says the very same words as Roger, and so it is Luffy who Shanks gives the hat to, an inheritance of will, not blood. But if Ace was supposed to be Joy Boy, what a coincidence that he stumbled upon or was chosen by, as some think is possible, the Maramara no Mi, a fruit whose flame powers can summon a sun, who in a collision with Blackbeard believed to embody the ultimate evil, was questioned as to which will win, the sun or the darkness. Don't be surprised if we find out down the road about other gods, such as the god or a god of darkness to counter the legend of the sun god. If Luffy were to now embody this sun, his interaction with Blackbeard during Jaya has greater meaning. There is a panel in which, as Blackbeard is speaking, we see both Ace and Shanks. There doesn't really appear to be a reason as to why. Thank you to whoever had pointed this out to me in the comments a while back, and I had used the idea in my Why Shanks Dies video, but could this have been Oda depicting each sun that Blackbeard's darkness would snuff out? In Norse mythology, there is a monstrous wolf known as Fenrir. According to one version of the myth, Fenrir will devour the sun, and during Ragnarok, the end of the world or final war, he will fight against the chief god Odin and swallow him. Focusing on the sun are Ace and Shanks, as shown in the panel again, two suns that would or will eventually set by Blackbeard's hand. But the true sun, the sun god Luffy, is he then Blackbeard's final opponent, to determine what is greater, as seen in various literary works, the light or the darkness. There is also the option of the 5 elder stars, 5 suns because stars are suns, not in the sense of Nika, but just generally speaking. Anyways, I've always been intrigued by this scene from that one One Piece opening or moment when the sun is covered up, eclipsed by the moon and darkness. What can an awakened Yami Yami no Mi do? Along with the power to destroy the world through the Quake Quake fruit, can the Yami Yami no Mi destroy the world as well? The black hole that swallows stars, the wolf that eats the sun. Which is why maybe the Gomu Gomu no Mi might be important, because its own awakening might negate Blackbeard's devil fruit powers somehow. Vibrations being absorbed by rubber, but also Luffy is symbolic of the sun, the dawn that rises out of the darkness. 2 Ds, 2 sides of the moon. One can be said to be the dark side, never knowing the light of the sun. But there's another possibility, which is why I brought up Sabo and Dragon earlier. Not sure if Shanks has ever met either of them, Luffy's real father and, in Shanks, a father figure, kind of, a role model. But Sabo has inherited the Maramara no Mi, and perhaps a part of Ace's soul, not just his legacy. The sun god Nika is described as being a brave warrior and a freer of slaves, which all fits the description of Sabo, right? The The revolutionaries go around freeing oppressed peoples. Sabo too should be able to manifest a sort of sun from his devil fruit. Also, I think in the Ace novels it is emphasized Ace seemed to want to surpass his father Roger. Becoming Pirate King was of little interest. Ace wanted to be greater than that. While talking, Ace tells Shanks that he has no intention of becoming Pirate King, but rather he wants to make his reputation spread throughout the whole world. To this, he will take on and defeat the world's most powerful organizations, particularly the Four Emperors. Ace then leaves, and Shanks and Ben Beckman note that his haki was strong enough to melt away the snow while he was there, a spirit that burned bright and as hot as the sun. Beckman is skeptical, however, about Ace's chances of fulfilling his dream as a pirate, saying that joining the revolutionary army would have made more sense. And so if Ace was better off being a revolutionary, funny how Sabo now has Ace's devil fruit. In the end, it was always meant to be, maybe. But we have an Ace, Luffy and Sabo, 3 brothers, and I'm not against the idea of Nika and Joyboy being different people or brothers or the same person, a title anyone could inherit or live up to. Each might or might have been a sun god in their own way, similar to Shanks and, I forgot to mention, Roger, Ace's father, who also wore the straw hat, and named his son after his own sword, Ace. Roger had fought to protect slaves on God Valley. The name of his sword was given to Ace, who consumed the Mare Marinomi, the power to hold the sun in your very hand, which mirrors Shanks' griffin, which in mythology carried the sun god himself to and from the sun. Okay, I now think it's time to get into Luffy's next gear, or his final gear. Of course, one can't always predict these things accurately, and I've made several predictions, especially when they will occur, not just if. But I've made several videos now about the true power of Advanced Conqueror's haki, which I'm sure many of you remember. A lot of my recent videos touch upon Conquerors in general because it feels so relevant to where the story is going in terms of not just the power system, but narrative elements as well. But I had mentioned Conquerors and the power to fight with your spirit, maybe being responsible for elemental and otherworldly or unexplained abilities. Haki is spirit after all, as a practicality, and so maybe Red Hawk, Red Rock, and whatever comes next is connected to this, and potential foreshadowing of what Luffy might be able to do with a new gear. Something related to fire is basically the gist of what I touched upon. There is a scene at the end of Marineford where Ace is dying and Luffy is holding his brother in his arms, incredibly close to himself. We don't fully understand devil fruits, how they work, how they transfer from one person to another, how wills are inherited. Much of it feels just symbolic, that's all. But I did share this idea with Joyboy some time ago in the DMs, that maybe just as one brother, Sabo, inherited Ace's actual devil fruit, Luffy too inherited a part of Ace's soul, as well as his dream, whether he knows it or not. Just like Zoro and Kuina have a shared dream and a shared promise that Zoro not just keeps for himself but his dead friend, Luffy also will become more than just the Pirate King but the very sun itself, fulfilling the legend of Nika by challenging the very world as Ace had wanted to do and as Beckman and others saw potential in him for, a fighter to the core. Whenever Luffy uses Red Hawk, we are reminded of Ace. We so often see an image of Ace flash aside or behind Luffy as he uses this ability, as if Ace's flaming soul burns within him too. I remember after Ace died and Luffy was knocked unconscious, very similar to how he looks now, and was being carried away, Whitebeard proclaimed, "You can erase their bloodline, but that flame will never die. The fire of that will, and the dream of the sun had been inherited." Ace had left a warning for Kaido in chapter 999, burning his fist into the statue of a dragon god, a message delivered in chapter 1000 so poetically, I guess you could call it poetic justice, by his brother. Ace had promised to return, and in some ways he did. Luffy's inheritance of his brother's will sending Kaido to his knees with a fiery fist. I still think the 4 symbols of the Chinese constellations as depicted by the following beasts: the azure dragon of the east, the vermilion bird of the south, the white tiger of the west, and the black tortoise, or turtle, also called black warrior, of the north, have great importance to certain characters that might include the Yonko, the 4 emperors. I also like how, given many consider Zoro to embody the tiger in his clash with Kaido as well, that maybe this opens the door for more than one character to carry this symbolism. And so maybe, depending on Luffy's future transformation that many predict should happen or must happen, he can come to embody one of the other creatures of Chinese mythology. A flaming vermilion bird or phoenix like Marco, or a fiery dragon like Kaido. Something involving fire, something related to the sun. And when you think about the sun is a star, and so, in a sense, a part of the constellations. The vermilion bird of the south is described as a red bird that resembles a pheasant with a 5-colored plumage and is perpetually covered in flames. And so Luffy using red hawk, hawk being a bird, and now red rock, rock being another bird, a bird of legend. Could this allude to his next gear? To mirror as well as distinguish himself from his brothers? A flaming red man. I saw something else on Twitter, and shout out to Gio, who you can follow on the screen here. It led me to ask, why now? As in, why is Wano the place Joy Boy will return to? Why choose this land for the legend to be reborn? Apparently Wano is based on Japan, the land of the rising sun, and so the place the sun god Nika will make his return. Props to Gio for making that specific connection. Next we have something that happens when the skin is exposed to sunlight. When the sun touches your skin, it produces vitamin D, something that makes the body stronger, and so the will of D has a connection to the sun. Crazy, right? But the return of Ace, the opening of Wano's borders, and the metaphorical dawn the world awaits. The god Nika and the fables attached to that figure. This legend, these stories feel as if they are all coming to a head, as if they are about to come true. Something that was mentioned at around the beginning of Onigashima, or maybe the middle, around the time Drake joined Luffy's alliance. In chapter 990 or 991, Drake recalls Kobe's words about Luffy, that Luffy's rare gift is like gravity. He has the power to pull people in toward him like the sun. That if there's hope you need, trust in Luffy. He's amazing. One thing about charisma is inspiration, and there is nothing more inspiring than someone that attempts to overcome adversity no matter the odds. Something that defines the character of every conqueror, to pursue any dream, to overcome any obstacle. Luffy is the sun at the center of it all, around which everything else orbits, even the fate of this very world. As Luffy returns to fight Kaido another time, which I mean it's Luffy, of course he will, it's interesting to think Luffy might be able to coat his entire body in this fire, to spread the embers of Ace's memory and lingering soul around himself if Red Hawk truly has haki or spiritual origins. Others have touched upon vulcanization, I did in the other gear video, but the hardening that results from vulcanization might be enough to damage or burn through Kaido's incredible defense and dragon scales, and when coupled with Conquerors, Kaido's will as well. We can't forget that at this point in the story, Luffy's success in determining who the next king will be will come down to several things, one of which is whose will is greater, a reflection of who is most deserving to be king. But Shanks, Luffy, and the former king, Roger. In chapter 1, Roger dies. This chapter begins the arc known as Romance Dawn. As one sun dims, another rises with Shanks. But even with the passage of the hat, Shanks' sun hasn't dimmed yet. Will this happen eventually? Does it have to? When his sun dims, will another rise with Luffy? I guess you could ask, how many sunsets has it taken to reach this point? How many times has that hat been passed down to reach this era, the great age of pirates? The sun god Nika, as a last bit of history, is said to also refer to the Greek god Nika, bringer of victory. Some say the word Nika can also be interpreted to mean one who conquers, one who wins. Griffin guided the chariot of the sun god Apollo, and Nika too rode a chariot. All that's left to wonder is if Luffy will be victorious over Kaido in the end. The dawn is associated with illumination and hope, the beginning of a new day, and thus a chance for happiness and improvement. Sunrise is a symbol of birth and rebirth, of awakening, the coming of light, resurrection. And you have to wonder about a figure such as Joy Boy, a boy that brought joy, inspiration to the world, returning from the darkness of the waters below to the faint hue of a rising sun. Will Luffy actually become the sun? His evolving soul, the flame inherited from Ace, a spirit that does the battle for you, and the idea that Luffy might surround himself entirely with fire, very much resembling Ace in the process, and so a promise from the distant past will finally be kept, as well as Ace's promise to Otama and Yamato. I said in another video about the Will of D that while some promises are meant to be broken, others are kept through an inheritance of will. Ace will return to Wano, in one way or another, and I guess you could say he already has. Oda has hinted at this before, Luffy reminding Otama of Ace, and Joy Boy shared something interesting on Twitter a while back, so shout out to him, but the bonfire occurring on Wano right now resembles the bonfire held on Skypiea. It's not just symbolic, it feels like a ritual, the dance akin to flickering embers that joyfully welcome the return of the sun. Will this so-called god return alongside Luffy's own reappearance? Will the sun rise along with his own inherited flames? The last time Luffy was knocked out by a Yonko-level opponent, Whitebeard had said something very interesting, alluding to Luffy, Ace, and the Will of D. You can erase their bloodline, but their flames will never die. Even as darkness abounds, all-consuming, that fire remains. We will have to wait and see. Don't forget to like the video, comment with your thoughts below, share this with your friends, and subscribe. Also click that notification bell. As always, there is more to come. Until next time, I'll see you all in Valhalla.
趣味が悪いな、オロチの野郎は。おろろろろ。